My name is Elena Navarro. I'm 32 years old and I'm a hospice nurse. I've sat beside strangers while their lungs filled with fluid. I've held hands that were turning cold. I know what grief smells like. It smells like lilies and antiseptic and something metallic in the back of your throat. But nothing prepared me for the way betrayal smells when it comes from your own father. It happened at my grandmother's funeral. The church was small, packed too tight with cousins I hadn't seen in years, and neighbors who only came because Grandma Rosa never missed a Sunday. The air was heavy with incense. My black dress clung to my back because it was 93 degrees outside, and the air conditioning had given up sometime in 2008. I stood in the second pew, not the first. That spot was reserved for my father. And my brother. Not me. I should have known then. My father, Miguel Navarro, hadn't spoken to me properly in almost 8 months. Short texts, cold replies, calls that went straight to voicemail. I told myself he was grieving early. Grandma had been sick for a year. Alzheimer's. The slow fade. But when he stood up at the podium to speak, he didn't even look at me. He talked about loyalty, about family legacy, about children who honor their blood. And then he said something that made the entire room shift. Some people, he said calmly, eyes fixed on the crucifix behind the congregation, forget where they come from. And when that happens, they're no longer Navarros. There was a pause, a deliberate one. Then he turned his head and looked straight at me. It wasn't loud. He didn't shout. My father doesn't shout. He erases. After the burial, when the dirt hit the casket and I felt my chest crack open for the second time that day, he pulled me aside near the marble statue of St. Michael. His jaw was tight. "You embarrassed this family," he said quietly. "I took care of her," I whispered. Every weekend, I was there. "That wasn't your place." "She asked for me." "That wasn't your decision to make." I still don't fully understand what he meant. That's one of the things that will haunt me for months. Then he said it. "From today forward, you are no longer my daughter." Just like that. No raised voice, no drama, just a verdict. He walked back toward the car where my brother Daniel was already waiting. And here's the part that gets me. No one stopped him. Not my aunts. Not my cousins. Not even my mother, who's been divorced from him for 10 years but still carries his last name like it's oxygen. They just looked away. If you've ever experienced something like this, being publicly erased by someone who's supposed to love you, you know the strange silence that follows. It's louder than screaming. I stood there alone, in heels sinking into cemetery grass. And I remember thinking one thing over and over. What did I do? Because here's what no one in that cemetery knew. 2 weeks before she died, Grandma Rosa had squeezed my hand and whispered something that didn't make sense at the time. "Elena," she said, her voice thin as tissue paper. "When the paper opens, don't be afraid." I thought she was confused. I thought she meant heaven. I had no idea she meant something else entirely. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from a law office downtown. I almost didn't answer. Block number, male voice, calm, professional. "Miss Navarro, this is attorney Stephen Rowe. We need you present for the reading of your grandmother's will." I felt my stomach drop. "I'm not involved in that," I said. "You probably want my father." A pause. "No," he replied. "We need you." That's when I knew something was wrong, because my father controls everything. Always has. Money, property, narratives. And if there was a will, he would already know what was in it. Unless he didn't. Unless Grandma Rosa had done something he couldn't control. The reading was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. My father and Daniel would be there. So would my 2 aunts. And me. the daughter who had just been disowned. I didn't sleep the night before, not because I expected anything, but because of the way my father looked at me in that church. It wasn't grief, it was calculation, like he was already 10 moves ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. There are 3 things I didn't know walking into that law office. First, why my grandmother insisted I sit by her bedside every Sunday for a year, even when she barely recognized me. Second, why my father had grown increasingly hostile every time I mentioned helping her with paperwork. And third, what was inside that will. I walked into that office in a navy blazer, hands steady, because that's what hospice nurses learn to do. We stay steady, even when everything inside is breaking. My father didn't look surprised to see me. That terrified me more than if he had. Attorney Rowe adjusted his glasses, opened a thick cream envelope, and cleared his throat. Under the final testament of Rosa Navarro, my father folded his hands, confident, certain. Then the lawyer said something that made the air in the room change temperature. The sum of $28 million? My father's head snapped up. Along with all property holdings and trust assets, are to be transferred in full to her granddaughter, Elena Navarro. Silence. Not dramatic silence, not cinematic, just disbelief. My name hung in the air like something fragile. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My father's face didn't turn red. He didn't shout. He just stared at me. And in that moment, I understood something chilling. He hadn't disowned me because I disappointed him. He disowned me because he thought I had nothing. And now everything had changed. But here's what you need to know. Money doesn't protect you from a man who feels entitled to it. And my father? He doesn't lose. Not publicly, not quietly, not without a fight. When he finally spoke, his voice was level. There must be a mistake. The lawyer shook his head. There isn't. And that was the moment I realized. The funeral wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I need you to understand something before we go any further. My father didn't wake up one morning and decide to disown me. He built toward it, brick by brick. My earliest memory of feeling unwanted isn't dramatic. It's small. That's how these things usually start. I was 7. Daniel was 10. We were in the kitchen of our old house on Calle Mariposa. Yellow linoleum floors. The refrigerator hummed too loud. My father was teaching Daniel how to make café con leche. Watch the temperature, he told him. Precision matters. I stood at the counter coloring in a workbook. I asked if I could help. You'll spill it, he said, without looking at me. It wasn't cruel, it was dismissive, but it set a pattern. Daniel learned business terms before he was 12. My father took him to construction sites, introduced him to investors, let him sit in on meetings at Navarro Development Group. I learned how to stay quiet, how to make myself smaller. When I brought home straight A's, my father nodded. When Daniel brought home a B in economics, my father sat him down for 2 hours to strategize improvement. Investment requires attention. That's what he used to say. And I was never considered an investment. My mother tried in her soft way to balance things. Elena is sensitive, she'd tell him. She feels things deeply. That won't help her survive, he'd respond. Survive what? I used to wonder. We lived in a 5-bedroom house. We had 2 cars. We vacationed in San Diego every summer. But in my father's mind, everything was war. Reputation was war. Money was war. Family image was war. And Daniel was his soldier. I was collateral. There's one memory I come back to often. I was 13, standing in the living room wearing a pale blue dress for my middle school graduation ceremony. I had been selected to give a short speech. I practiced it for weeks. When I finished rehearsing in front of my parents, there was silence. My mother clapped first. My father looked at his watch. "Don't ramble," he said. "People lose interest." That sentence shaped my entire adult personality. Don't ramble. Don't take up space. Don't make it about you. So when I chose to become a nurse instead of joining the family business, he didn't yell. He simply withdrew approval. "You're choosing comfort over ambition," he said. I was 19. I didn't choose hospice because it was comfortable. I chose it because sitting beside dying people felt more honest than negotiating land contracts. But in my father's world, compassion had no return on investment. When my parents divorced, I was 22. Daniel stayed aligned with him. I drifted toward my mother. My father remarried within 3 years. A woman 10 years younger. Polished. Strategic. She understood hierarchy. I became the daughter who visited on holidays. The daughter who got polite hugs. The daughter whose career was described as nice during introductions. And then there was Grandma Rosa. She was different. She saw me. Not in a dramatic way, not with speeches, but in quiet gestures. She'd press folded bills into my palm when I was in college. "For gas," she'd say. She'd ask about my patients. Real questions. Names. Stories. When her memory started slipping, it scared everyone except me. Because I already knew how to sit in the slipping. My father hired a private caregiver at first, but Grandma grew restless. She'd ask for me. Specifically. "Elena," she'd say. At Sunday dinners, she'd grip my wrist and whisper, "Don't let them decide who you are." At the time, I thought she meant aging. Now I know she meant something else. The tension really started last year. Grandma's attorney, yes, the same one, began coming to the house more frequently. Paperwork, trust revisions, asset reviews. My father handled most of it. But one afternoon, I arrived early and found Grandma alone in her study. The caregiver had stepped out. There were documents spread across her desk. Legal papers. She looked confused. "Can you read this to me?" she asked. I hesitated. I knew my father wouldn't like that. But she squeezed my hand. So I read. Slowly. Carefully. It was an amendment draft. Beneficiary changes. My father walked in halfway through. I will never forget his expression. Not anger. Not panic. Calculation. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Reading," Grandma replied before I could speak. "She asked me to," I said. He walked over, closed the folder. "That's not necessary," he said. But Grandma didn't let go of my hand. "Elena stays," she said firmly. It was one of the last lucid sentences she ever spoke. After that day, things shifted. My father stopped inviting me to business dinners. Daniel stopped answering my texts. I heard from my aunt that there was concern I was influencing Grandma. Influencing. Like I was manipulating a woman who had survived 2 wars and raised 4 children. When Grandma moved into in-home hospice care, I offered to cover weekends to give the staff relief. My father resisted. "She needs professionals," he said. "I am a professional." He didn't like that answer. Those Sundays became sacred. I'd sit by her bed, play boleros softly, rub lotion into her hands. Sometimes she'd mistake me for her sister. Sometimes she'd stare at me and say, "You're the strong one." I didn't feel strong. I felt like a guest in my own family. 2 weeks before she passed, she had a clear day. Lucid, focused. She asked everyone to leave except me. That's when she said it. "When the paper opens, don't be afraid." I asked what paper. She smiled faintly. "You'll see." And then she slept for almost 16 hours. After she died, my father barely looked at me during planning meetings. He handled the funeral arrangements, the guest list, the seating. He told my aunt I was overstepping again. And then came the funeral, the public erasure. What I didn't understand then, but am beginning to now, is this. My father wasn't reacting to grief. He was reacting to uncertainty, and men like him don't tolerate uncertainty, especially when it involves money, especially when it involves control. If you've ever grown up in a house where love felt conditional, you know the quiet math you start doing in your head. What did I do wrong? What do I fix? How do I earn it back? But here's the part that's starting to settle in my chest like a slow truth. Maybe this was never about earning. Maybe it was about ownership. And my father just realized he might not own everything, including the narrative. Friday morning at 10 a.m., when the lawyer finished reading that number, $28 million, I saw something crack behind my father's eyes. Not grief, not disbelief, fear. And that's when I understood. This wasn't over. It was escalating. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a number like $28 million. It's not loud. It doesn't echo. It compresses the air. I remember staring at Attorney Rowe's mouth as if maybe I'd misheard him, as if maybe he'd said 2.8 or 28,000, something normal, something survivable. But he didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. My father leaned back slowly in his chair, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. Daniel stared at the table like the wood grain might rearrange itself into an explanation. "Read that again," my father said calmly. The lawyer did. Every asset, every holding, the downtown commercial properties, the vineyard shares, the trust accounts, all of it. In my name. My hands were folded in my lap so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about property. I was thinking about Sunday afternoons in Grandma's bedroom, about the way she'd grip my wrist when my father walked in, about the folder he closed too quickly. Something in me shifted then, a realization. This wasn't a surprise to him. It was a miscalculation. When the reading ended, no one spoke for almost a full minute. Then my father stood. "There will be a contest," he said, voice measured. "This is clearly undue influence." The word hit like a slap. Undue. Influence. Like I'd manipulated a dying woman. Like the hours I spent changing sheets and massaging swollen hands were strategic. Attorney Rowe didn't flinch. The will was revised 6 months ago. Multiple witnesses. Medical competency confirmed. Video documentation included. Video documentation. My stomach dropped. Grandma planned this. Carefully, deliberately. My father's jaw tightened just slightly. If you didn't know him, you wouldn't notice. But I did. He was recalibrating. Daniel finally looked at me, and the look wasn't anger. It was accusation. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. Nothing. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had I done something? Had my presence alone shifted something unintentionally? That's the cruelest part about growing up in conditional love. You always assume guilt first. We left the office separately. My father didn't speak to me, didn't acknowledge me, just walked past like I was invisible again. Only this time, I wasn't empty-handed. The next 48 hours were chaos. My phone lit up non-stop. Unknown numbers. Family group chats exploding. Aunt Teresa left a voicemail saying she was deeply disappointed. Daniel sent a single text. "This isn't right." My father sent nothing. Then the emails started. Formal. Legal language. His attorneys requesting clarification of circumstances, suggesting cognitive decline, implying manipulation. The narrative was forming quickly. Elena, the hospice nurse. Elena who had access. Elena who read documents. Elena who isolated Grandma. The story was neat, clean, believable, and I felt myself shrinking inside it. On Monday morning, I went to work. Room 214. Mrs. Hargrove, Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I adjusted her morphine drip while her daughter cried in the hallway. Life didn't pause. Grief didn't wait for inheritance drama. But halfway through the shift, my supervisor called me into her office. There had been a complaint. Anonymous. Questioning my professional boundaries with elderly patients. I stared at her. Cold flooded my chest. The complaint referenced my grandmother by name. It suggested a pattern. I felt the room tilt. My father wasn't contesting quietly. He was dismantling me. Professionally. Methodically. And that's when it happened. For the first time in years, I cried in public. Not dramatic sobbing. Just silent tears sliding down while I tried to explain something that suddenly sounded defensive even to my own ears. I took unpaid leave that afternoon. Drove home on autopilot. Sat in my apartment with the blinds closed. And for a moment, just a moment, I wished the will didn't exist. Because before the money, I was just the disappointing daughter. Now, I was the greedy one. If you've ever been painted as the villain in someone else's story, you know how quickly people adjust their perception. They don't ask for proof. They ask for consistency with what they already believed. And my father had been curating that belief for years. That night, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer. His voice was tight. Dad says you coerced her. I didn't. He says there's footage missing from the house cameras. What? He says you knew how to disable them. I felt physically ill. I'm a nurse, Daniel, not a hacker. There was a long pause. Just tell me the truth. I am. He exhaled sharply. This is destroying everything. That word. Everything. As if everything wasn't already fractured long before the will. As if loyalty only mattered when money was involved. After we hung up, I went into my bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. 32 years old. Successful career. Independent. And still reduced to a child seeking approval. I slid down the wall and sat on the cold tile floor. I thought about Grandma's voice. When the paper opens, don't be afraid. But I was afraid. Afraid of legal battles I couldn't afford. Afraid of losing my license. Afraid of becoming exactly what my father said I was. An embarrassment. The lowest moment didn't come with yelling or confrontation. It came quietly. At 2:17 a.m., when I opened my banking app and saw the first legal retainer invoice hit my temporary estate account. 6 figures. Just like that. This wasn't symbolic. It was war. And I didn't have my father's experience, or his connections, or his emotional armor. All I had was the truth. And in families like mine, truth isn't always enough. I turned off the lights, sat in the dark, and for the first time since the funeral, I whispered something out loud. I can't do this. The room didn't answer. The phone didn't ring. There was no dramatic shift. Just me. Alone. At the bottom. The thing about hitting bottom is that it's not dramatic. There's no orchestra swelling in the background. No sudden clarity. Just quiet. And bills. And unanswered calls. The week after the complaint at work, I requested a formal meeting with the hospital's ethics board. I brought documentation, shift logs, witness statements, patient records showing every interaction I'd had with Grandma during her hospice period. I was calm. That's my training. Calm even when your pulse is sprinting. The board listened. They asked careful questions. They thanked me for my transparency. And then they said something that made my stomach drop. Until this investigation is resolved, we'll need you to step away from direct patient care. Administrative leave. Not fired, not cleared. Just suspended in limbo. I walked out of that hospital carrying a cardboard box with a framed photo of my graduating class and a ceramic mug that said, "Compassion is strength." The irony wasn't lost on me. When I got to my car, I didn't cry this time. I just sat there and stared at the steering wheel. Don't be afraid. Grandma's voice again. It felt less like comfort and more like instruction now. The legal emails escalated. My father's attorneys filed a formal challenge to the will, citing undue influence and diminished capacity. They requested access to my financial records, my phone records, my emails. They were building a case that I had strategically inserted myself into Grandma's final months, as if I hadn't been there every Sunday long before paperwork was even mentioned. I called Attorney Rowe. His voice remained steady, almost detached. "They're attempting intimidation," he said. "This is common in high-value estate disputes." High value. That phrase sounded clinical, transactional, like my grandmother had become a line item. "Can they win?" I asked. There was a pause. "They can try." That wasn't reassuring. The isolation deepened quickly. My Aunt Teresa stopped responding, entirely. Daniel blocked me on social media. Family group photos from the funeral circulated online without me in them. Cropped. It was subtle, petty, effective. I started second-guessing everything. Did I smile too much during those Sunday visits? Did I ask too many questions about documents? Was my presence enough to create suspicion? That's how psychological manipulation works. It makes you interrogate your own memory. One afternoon, I drove to my mother's apartment unannounced. She opened the door, surprised. Her eyes softened immediately. "You look tired," she said. I sat at her small kitchen table, the same table she bought after the divorce when she had to downsize. "I didn't do anything wrong," I told her. She reached across and took my hand. "I know." "You believe me?" "Of course I do." That broke something open inside me, because I realized I had been waiting for someone to say that. Not a lawyer, not a board member, just someone. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she said something careful. "Your father has always needed control to feel safe." Safe. I thought about that word. "He thinks you're taking something from him," she continued. "I didn't ask for it." "I know, but he doesn't see it that way." I left her apartment feeling steadier. Not fixed, but steadier. That night I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I opened the estate documents myself. Not to calculate, not to fantasize, just to understand. The assets were complex. Diversified holdings, trust structures layered carefully. Grandma hadn't acted impulsively. She had planned this. There were letters attached to certain accounts, personal notes, instructions. I hadn't read them before. I was too overwhelmed. But now, alone in my apartment, I opened the first one. "Elena," it began. Her handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "You listen when others talk. You stay when others leave. I have watched you for years. Strength does not shout." I stopped reading. Tears blurred the ink. Strength does not shout. That was the phrase, the one that would anchor me, because my father's power had always been loud, strategic, public. But Grandma's gift wasn't just money, it was validation. And for the first time, I felt something other than fear. I felt clarity. The next morning, I called Attorney Rowe. "I want to countersue for defamation," I said. There was silence on the other end. "That's a significant step." "They filed a complaint with my employer." "Yes." "They're attempting to damage my career." "Yes." "Then I won't just defend, I'll respond." He exhaled slowly. "All right." It wasn't anger driving me, it was boundary. A line. For years I absorbed. I adjusted. I stayed quiet. But strength does not shout. It also does not collapse. Over the next few weeks we gathered evidence, video documentation from the will signing, medical evaluations confirming Grandma's cognitive clarity on revision days, Time-stamped security footage proving I never accessed house systems. And something else. A recording. Attorney Rowe informed me there was a private conversation captured during the will revision process. Grandma had insisted on it. For protection. He hadn't shared it yet. "We may need it later," he said. Later. That word hung heavy, because I knew what it meant. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a reckoning. Meanwhile, my father remained publicly composed. He attended business functions, hosted charity events, spoke about legacy and ethics, and quietly told mutual acquaintances that I was confused, that I had misunderstood Grandma's intentions. Gaslighting at scale. If you've ever been systematically misrepresented by someone with more power, you know how disorienting it feels. You start to question your own voice, but something had shifted in me. Not confidence, not yet, but resolve. I stopped checking social media, stopped reading family threads, started meeting with a financial advisor independent of the Navarro circle. I didn't make big purchases, didn't change apartments, didn't touch a dollar beyond legal necessities. Because this wasn't about lifestyle, it was about truth. 3 weeks after the reading, I received a notice. Court date set. Preliminary hearing. Public record. My father was taking this fully into the light, which meant I would have to stand there, across from him, and not shrink. The night before the hearing, I stood in my bedroom adjusting a navy suit, the same one I wore to the will reading. I looked at myself in the mirror. 32. Tired, but steady. Strength does not shout. It stands. And tomorrow, I would stand. The first court hearing lasted exactly 19 minutes. It felt longer. My father sat across the aisle in a charcoal suit, hands folded, posture perfect. Daniel was beside him. They didn't look at me when I walked in. They didn't have to. Their message had already been delivered. You don't belong here. The judge scheduled further review, requested additional documentation. No dramatic rulings, no cinematic confrontations, just process. But something important happened that morning. When we stepped outside the courthouse, a reporter approached my father. He handled it smoothly. "This is a private family matter," he said. "We're simply seeking clarity." Clarity. He framed himself as reasonable, measured, concerned. Then the reporter turned to me. I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to say nothing, to let him narrate. But Grandma's words surfaced again. Strength does not shout. It also does not disappear. "I'm honoring my grandmother's final wishes," I said calmly. That's all. No accusation, no drama, just truth. The clip aired that evening, and something unexpected happened. People believed me. Not everyone, but enough. Old colleagues texted. Former patients' families reached out. Even a nurse I trained years ago wrote, "You don't have to prove compassion to anyone." I didn't realize how much I needed that until I read it. The hospital investigation closed 2 weeks later. No misconduct found. Anonymous complaint dismissed due to lack of evidence. My supervisor called personally. "We'd like you back," she said. I thanked her, and then I surprised myself. "I won't be returning." Silence on the line. I had been thinking about it for days, not out of bitterness, but clarity. The complaint exposed something fragile in the system. A single accusation had been enough to sideline me, and I didn't want my career to be that vulnerable again. The estate funds weren't fully accessible yet, due to the ongoing challenge, but a portion was released for operational purposes. To sit with people at the end of life. Now to sit with people at the end of life. Now I wanted to support families before they reached that point. Advanced care planning, ethical decision consultations, hospice transition guidance. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't grand, but it was mine. My father built buildings, I built conversations, and slowly the practice grew. Not explosively, not magically, but steadily. Families appreciated honesty. They appreciated someone explaining medical realities without pressure. I hired one administrative assistant, then a second nurse, part-time. The work grounded me. It reminded me who I was outside the Navarro narrative. Meanwhile, the legal battle intensified. Depositions scheduled. Financial audits requested. My father's team attempted mediation, not because they believed they would lose, but because public litigation was beginning to chip at his image. One evening, Daniel called unexpectedly. His voice sounded different, less sharp. "Dad's willing to settle," he said. "For what?" I asked. "A portion, if you drop the countersuit." There it was. The offer. Not reconciliation, not apology, transaction. "How much?" I asked. He named a figure. It was substantial. More money than I would ever earn in a lifetime as a nurse. For a moment, I considered it. Peace. Quiet. An end. But I knew what accepting meant. It meant validating his narrative. That I had taken something unfairly. That I needed negotiation to legitimize it. "I won't," I said calmly. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm standing still." There was a long silence. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. And for the first time in my life, I answered without hesitation. It was already broken. We hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat there in my office after hours, lights dim, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. Strength does not shout. It endures. The weeks before the full hearing were strange. Business for my practice continued growing. I was invited to speak at a local medical ethics conference. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been comfortable. But I went. And I told a story, not about my family, but about patient autonomy, about listening, about respecting final wishes even when they disrupt power structures. The room was quiet when I finished, not out of pity, out of recognition. Afterward, a woman approached me. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, measured tone. "I'm a forensic accountant," she said. "I've been following your case." My stomach tightened. "Inheritance disputes are rarely about the money," she continued. "They're about control." I almost laughed at the understatement. She handed me her card. "If you need independent asset tracing, call me." That night, I couldn't sleep, because something she said lingered. Independent asset tracing. The will transferred assets to me. But it didn't erase history. And suddenly, I wondered, had everything in my father's empire truly been clean? Or had Grandma seen something I hadn't? It was the first time the possibility surfaced. That this fight wasn't just about entitlement, it might be about exposure. 3 days later, Attorney Rowe called. "They've requested emergency review," he said. "Why?" "They're claiming newly discovered evidence." My chest tightened. "What kind?" "A financial discrepancy tied to one of the commercial properties." On my end, no. Pause. On his. The room went still. For months, I had been defending, absorbing, reacting. But now the ground was shifting under his feet. And if there was one thing I knew about my father, he doesn't lose. Not publicly, not quietly, not without escalation. The hearing date was moved forward. Press coverage increased. And for the first time since the funeral, I sensed something different in the air. Not fear. Momentum. The collision was coming. Not just between father and daughter, but between truth and reputation. And only one of them could stay standing. The courtroom was fuller this time. Not packed, not sensational, but fuller. A few local reporters. 2 business associates of my father's. My Aunt Teresa, sitting stiffly in the second row like she'd rather be anywhere else. I wore the same navy suit. Strength does not shout. It stands. My father entered 10 minutes late. Not because he had to be, because he could. That was always his style. Subtle dominance. Controlled timing. He didn't look at me when he sat down. Daniel did. There was something unsettled in his expression now. Not accusation. Not loyalty. Uncertainty. The judge opened with procedural remarks, then allowed both sides to present updates regarding the newly discovered financial discrepancy. My father's attorney stood first. He framed it as irrelevant. Administrative oversight. A misunderstanding in asset reporting connected to one of the downtown commercial properties transferred under the will. Technical. Boring. Designed to shrink attention. Then, Attorney Rose stood. Calm, measured. Your Honor, the discrepancy is not minor. It involves pre-transfer restructuring of ownership percentages 3 weeks before the will revision. My father didn't move, but I saw it. A single muscle twitch in his jaw. Rowe continued. Restructuring that temporarily reduced the reported value of the estate before beneficiary documentation was finalized. The courtroom shifted. Subtle, but real. Because now this wasn't about whether I influenced my grandmother. It was about whether someone else tried to influence the estate's valuation. My father's attorney objected. Procedural, deflecting. The judge allowed limited continuation. Rowe didn't raise his voice. He never does. We have evidence suggesting that the decedent became aware of these adjustments shortly before amending her will. The word aware landed heavily. Because if Grandma knew someone was repositioning assets, it explained everything. The tension in her study. The way she insisted I stay. The recording. My father finally spoke, not loudly, but directly. This is an outrageous implication. His tone was steady, controlled outrage. Are you suggesting I manipulated my own mother? No one answered immediately. The silence was surgical. And then Rose said something that changed the temperature in the room. We are suggesting she believed you might. There it was. Not accusation. Not yet. But motive. I watched my father carefully. He didn't explode. He recalculated. That's what makes him dangerous. The judge ordered a temporary forensic review of the property transfers and postponed final determination pending results. Not a loss, not a win, but a fracture. Outside the courthouse, the press was more aggressive. Mr. Navarro, did you attempt to reduce estate valuation prior to revision? He offered the same measured response. Absolutely not. My record speaks for itself. Then a reporter turned to me again. Ms. Navarro, do you believe your grandmother changed her will because of financial misconduct? My pulse thudded in my ears. This was the moment that could turn me into the villain publicly. One reckless sentence, one emotional reaction. Strength does not shout. She changed her will for reasons she believed were right, I said. I'm here to respect that. Nothing more. No mud. No speculation. My father's eyes flicked toward me for the first time that day, and in them, I saw something new. Not anger. Threat assessment. That evening, Daniel came to my office unannounced. He stood awkwardly in the doorway. This is nice, he said, looking around at the small waiting area, the soft lighting, the framed credentials. Thank you. He didn't sit. Did you know about the property transfers? No. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't either. That mattered more than he realized, because Daniel had always been inside the operations, groomed for them. If he didn't know, then either it was handled quietly or intentionally. He says it's standard tax positioning, Daniel said. Is it? He hesitated. Sometimes. We stood in silence, two siblings orbiting the same gravity but finally seeing different sides of it. Did Grandma ever say anything to you? He asked. I thought about her grip on my wrist, her insistence, her voice. Only that strength doesn't shout, I said. Daniel frowned slightly, like he didn't understand the language. He left without another word. The forensic audit began the following week. It moved quickly. Too quickly, which usually means something's already visible. My practice continued growing, but I found myself distracted more often. Not by fear, by anticipation. 3 weeks later, Roe called again. His voice was different this time. Not detached. Alert. They found discrepancies beyond the initial property, he said. How many? Several. My chest tightened. Misreported valuations, temporary shell adjustments, timing overlaps. I closed my office door. Is it illegal? Pause. Potentially. There it was. The shift. For months, my father had framed me as manipulative, unethical, opportunistic. Now investigators were combing through his structures, publicly. The next hearing was scheduled immediately. Emergency review. Full attendance required. The courtroom was even more crowded. This time, whispers filled the space before proceedings even began. My father looked composed, but something about his stillness felt strained. The forensic accountant testified first. Clinical, precise, documented evidence of asset repositioning in the months leading up to Grandma's will amendment. Patterns that suggested strategic undervaluation. The judge asked one question. Were these actions disclosed to the decedent prior to revision? The accountant hesitated. We found no record indicating they were. Silence. Not compressed this time, expansive. My father's attorney attempted damage control, complex financial structuring, industry norms, misinterpretation. But the tone had shifted. This was no longer a daughter defending herself. This was a patriarch defending his empire. When the session ended, the judge announced a formal investigation into potential fiduciary misconduct. Fiduciary misconduct. The phrase echoed in my head. Outside, reporters swarmed. My father didn't speak this time. He walked straight to his car. Daniel lingered. He looked at me. And for the first time in our lives, there was no hierarchy between us. Just two adults standing in the aftermath of something breaking. If this is true, he began, but didn't finish. Strength does not shout. It waits. And the waiting was over. Because now, the truth wasn't just defending me. It was coming for him. The recording surfaced 3 days before the formal misconduct hearing. I hadn't heard it yet. Attorney Rowe insisted we wait until strategy was finalized. But the mere existence of it changed everything. Grandma had insisted on documentation during her final will revision. Not just signatures, not just witnesses. Video, audio. Her voice. Clear, conscious, intentional. The forensic audit had already cracked open my father's carefully curated image. Local business blogs were picking up the story. Words like valuation, irregularities, and fiduciary breach floated around his name. He hadn't been charged with anything yet, but scrutiny is its own kind of exposure. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early. The courtroom felt colder than usual. My father was already seated. Perfect posture, neutral expression, but his eyes didn't scan the room the way they used to. They stayed fixed forward. Daniel sat beside him again, but this time his body leaned slightly away. Distance measured in inches can say more than arguments measured in hours. The judge called the session to order. Attorney Rowe began with documentation summaries, asset transfers, timelines, patterns. Then he paused. There is an additional piece of evidence we would like entered into record. My pulse steadied. Strength does not shout. It endures. The screen behind the judge flickered on. And there she was, Grandma Rosa, seated at her study desk, the same desk where I once read documents aloud while my father closed the folder too quickly. Her hair was thinner. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes, clear, focused. The attorney on screen asked her standard competency questions: name, date, location. She answered each without hesitation. Then came the question that changed everything. Mrs. Navarro, can you explain in your own words why you are amending your will? She inhaled slowly. I have observed behavior, she said carefully. Financial decisions I do not agree with. My father's jaw tightened visibly now. On the screen, she continued. I built this with my husband. It was meant to protect family, not to be repositioned without transparency. The room was silent. No whispering, no shuffling, just her voice. I trust Elena, she added. She listens. She does not rush. She does not calculate while I speak. My throat tightened. Not because of the money, because she saw me, even at the end. The attorney on video asked, gently, are you being pressured to make this change? She looked directly into the camera. No. Then she said something none of us expected. My son believes strength is control, she said softly. He is wrong. The video ended, and for a moment, no one moved. My father's attorney stood abruptly. Objection to contextual framing. The judge raised a hand. Overruled. The decedent's statement is admissible. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to. The air around him felt different now. Not dominant. Defensive. The forensic accountant was recalled to clarify how the timing of asset restructuring aligned precisely with the period Grandma described as concerning. It wasn't direct proof of criminal intent, but it was motive. And motive shifts narratives. When proceedings recessed, reporters flooded the hallway. Questions sharper now. Not about me, about him. Mr. Navarro, did you fail to disclose asset repositioning to your mother? He didn't answer. For the first time since this began, he avoided the cameras. Daniel stayed behind in the courtroom after most people left. I gathered my papers slowly. He approached. Did you know about the recording? He asked. No. He nodded slowly. She really believed that? Yes. He swallowed hard. There it was. The collapse of the false narrative. For months, he had held on to the idea that I manipulated Grandma. Now he had to confront something harder. That our father might have manipulated her. Or at least tried. Why didn't she talk to me? He asked quietly. I thought about that carefully. She may have tried, I said. But you were always aligned with him. That wasn't accusation, just reality. Daniel looked down at his hands. I thought loyalty meant agreement, he said. It doesn't, I replied. Outside, legal analysts were already speculating about potential fiduciary investigations, expanding beyond estate matters. Investors were asking questions. Business partners were distancing themselves publicly, not dramatically, just enough. Consequences rarely explode, they erode. 2 days later, my father requested private mediation again, not through Daniel this time, directly through counsel. The offer was different. Full withdrawal of contest, public statement affirming Grandma's autonomy, request for me to drop defamation countersuit, and a personal meeting. The personal meeting surprised me. I agreed. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted clarity. We met in his office downtown, the same office where I once waited as a teenager while he closed million-dollar deals. He stood when I entered. He looked older. Not physically, structurally, like something inside had shifted weight. He didn't apologize. That would have required vulnerability he doesn't possess easily. Instead, he said, "You've made your point." I held his gaze. I didn't set out to make one. Silence. He walked to the window overlooking the city. All of this could have been handled privately. No, I said calmly. It couldn't have. He turned slowly. You're willing to destroy what I built. Strength does not shout. It was never mine to destroy, I replied, and it was never yours to reposition without transparency. His eyes hardened slightly. You think this makes you righteous? No, I said. It makes me responsible. That landed. He studied me for a long moment, as if recalibrating who I was. Not the quiet daughter, not the emotional nurse, but something steadier. He finally nodded once. The contest will be withdrawn. And the statement? I asked. It will affirm her competence. I considered the countersuit. It had leverage. It had power. But I didn't need punishment. I needed truth documented. I'll drop defamation once the statement is public, I said. He agreed. Not warmly, but clearly. When I left his office, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced. Power had shifted. Not because I shouted. Not because I exposed him recklessly, but because I stood and let the paper speak. The public statement was released on a Tuesday at 9 a.m. Precise, carefully worded, reviewed by 3 legal teams. It affirmed that Rosa Navarro amended her will of her own clear and competent volition. It acknowledged that the contest was being withdrawn out of respect for her documented intentions. It made no mention of manipulation, no mention of me at all. That was intentional. My father protects his language the way other people protect their children. But the damage had already shifted. Business publications quietly noted the withdrawn challenge. Investors requested independent audits. A board seat he'd held for 12 years was temporarily suspended pending review. Nothing explosive, just erosion. Strength does not shout. It doesn't need to. I dropped the defamation countersuit the same afternoon the statement went live. Not because he deserved relief, but because I didn't want to anchor my future to retaliation. If you've ever been hurt deeply, you know how seductive revenge can feel. It promises symmetry, closure, but revenge ties you to the injury. I wanted something else. The estate transfer finalized 3 months later. $28 million. It still felt abstract when I saw it reflected in official documents. Numbers on paper. But I knew what they represented. Not luxury, responsibility. Grandma didn't give me that money to elevate me above anyone. She gave it to place weight in steady hands. The first thing I did was pay every legal invoice, in full. The second thing I did was establish a trust, transparent, audited, professionally managed, dedicated to elder care advocacy and financial oversight education. Because here's the part no one talks about. Estate abuse happens quietly. Families fracture over control long before money surfaces, and elderly voices get dismissed as confusion far too easily. I wanted systems that made that harder. My practice expanded into a full center within a year. 5 nurses, 2 social workers, a legal consultant on retainer. We offered workshops on advanced directives, transparent financial planning, family mediation before crisis. Not glamorous work. Necessary work. My father never stepped inside, but he heard about it. The city isn't that big. Daniel did. He came one afternoon unannounced again, but this time he sat down. He looked different, less certain, more thoughtful. I left the company, he said. I blinked. When? 2 months ago. Why? He shrugged slightly. I needed to understand who I am outside of him. That landed deeper than he probably realized. We didn't hug. We didn't dramatize. But something real settled between us. Not alliance, not undoing, just honesty. We started meeting for coffee once a month. Careful. Slow. Rebuilding doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in consistency. My father and I haven't had a personal conversation since that office meeting. We see each other occasionally at public events, polite nods, measured distance. There's no dramatic forgiveness arc here, no tearful reconciliation. Boundaries are clearer now, structured. He no longer controls the narrative about me, and I no longer seek validation from him. That's the real inheritance. If you've ever lived under someone else's definition of you, you know how heavy it feels. Tell me what you would have done. Would you have taken the settlement early? Would you have walked away entirely? Type karma if you believe the truth eventually surfaces. Not loudly, not theatrically, but steadily. Because that's how it happened here. Not with fireworks, with documentation, with patience, with standing still long enough for facts to breathe. 1 year after the funeral, I visited Grandma's grave alone. Early morning, cool air. The cemetery was quiet except for distant traffic. I brought white lilies. I knelt down, brushed dust from her name. Strength does not shout, I whispered. I finally understood what she meant. Strength isn't domination. It isn't control. It isn't being the loudest voice in the room. It's staying grounded when someone tries to erase you. It's holding steady when your name is questioned. It's choosing responsibility over retaliation. I didn't win because I inherited money. I stood because she trusted me to. And I protected that trust. That's the part that matters. As I walked back to my car, the sun started rising behind the trees, light spilling slowly over marble stones. No applause, no audience, just quiet clarity. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the daughter who wasn't enough. I felt like the woman who didn't need permission anymore. And that was worth more than $28 million. If this story moved you, if at any point you felt that knot in your chest because you've lived something similar, then this wasn't just a story, it was a mirror. So tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have taken the settlement and walked away? Or would you have stood still and let the truth unfold? And if you believe that strength doesn't have to shout to be powerful, type strength below. I read your comments. I really do. If you made it all the way to the end, that tells me this story meant something to you. So make sure you like this video. It helps more than you think. It tells YouTube that stories like this matter. And if you want more emotionally layered, real-life family dramas where the truth unfolds slowly, where justice feels earned, and where silence can be more powerful than revenge, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story, because sometimes the loudest battles are the ones fought quietly. I'll see you in the next one.